Okay, let's go to the next one on gay marriage. This was some news that we didn't necessarily expect. And let's set up the little bit of history on this because it's kind of interesting, which is after the Dobbs decision where Clarence Thomas said in his concurring opinion that not only should Roe versus Wade be on the table for being overturned, but Obergefell as well, it opened up the door to a lot of speculation, which is that, oh my God, is the court going to get or possibly get rid of gay marriage? Could they even go back and get rid of interracial marriage? Two of these things which were decided at the level of Supreme Court. Senator Tammy Baldwin, one of the only openly gay members of the Senate, decided to take it upon herself to try and whip the votes for that type of legislation. She was not able to get the legislation on the floor or votes committed from Republicans before the election. But she had promised before that it was going to come during lame duck, which is that period right now before the new Senate is then sworn in. What's interesting is she actually delivered. She announced almost immediately after the election, I have the legislation, I have the votes. Many of these Republican senators, their only objection was like, we need to have some sort of religious liberty protection for religious organizations, as in it doesn't going to target them in ways that not necessarily worth getting into right now, because according to these Republicans, they say that language has been added to the bill and they feel that this is an actual up or down vote on gay marriage and interracial marriage itself. That legislation then had a key procedural vote, proceed yesterday in the Senate, and it passed pretty overwhelmingly. Let's put this up there on the screen. 62 to 37, advancing the marriage equality bill, protecting same-sex and interracial marriage under federal law. The 12 Republicans, let's go and put the next one up there on the screen. This is important because there's a lot of diversity going on here. Senators Blunt, Burr, Capito, Collins, Ernst, Loomis, Murkowski, Portman, Romney, Sullivan, Tillis, and Young. And Krystal, for me, that is just a real amalgam of both retiring senators, quote unquote, moderates. Yeah. But, Mitt Romney is
I was
a Mormon.
Gonna say, Romney's a little surprising because he's obviously very religious. Utah's a very religious state. So that was a little surprising.
Mitt Romney is a Mormon. Todd Young is from Indiana. You have Joni Ernst from Iowa. Iowa, I was saying, is a very Catholic state, especially with GOP voters. You have Cynthia Loomis. I mean, Wyoming is one of the most Republican states in the country. So for a lot of these senators, there's not necessarily any political benefit in voting for this at all. It also comes to a real test for the rest of the Republican senators who didn't necessarily vote in terms of the procedural bill. Now that they have the votes, are you going to vote up or down? Marco Rubio famously said, I think it's a waste of time. It's like, well, okay, now it's on the Senate floor, so are you going to vote for it or not? I mean, I don't think he'll pay a price either way. He won by almost 20 points in Florida, so he can genuinely just vote however he wants. He is very religious. It's possible that he goes with that one, but I think it will be an actual test of kind of the civil war within the GOP as to whether to leave the old culture war behind and do a new one, or to try and, I guess, reclaim an old position which was held by the party and effectively abandoned after Obergefell, but now being put back on the table.
Yeah.
You found this clip, Ben Shapiro speaking on the Daily Wire, declaring you cannot be a Republican and support this legislation. Let's take a listen.
Let me just put this out there for the Republican senators. If you vote in favor of the idea that society has an obligation to recognize male-male or female-female dyads in the same way that society has an obligation to recognize male-female, you should not be in the Republican Party. You shouldn't. And the reason I say this is not because I wish to shrink the size of the Republican Party, because if the fundamental basis of human society is male-female child, and you think that by passing a law you can change that reality, you do not belong in government.
See, that's interesting to me because on a couple of levels. I think it's interesting on a couple levels. A, it presumes that he gets to decide who's a Republican or not, which I think that we all learned in 2015 is not necessarily how that entire game goes. But B, I think it does show that these people in this wing, we haven't heard from them in a long time.
Yeah.
Basically 2015 and so, yeah, Ted Cruz, he ran for president, but even he wasn't talking all that much about Obergefell on the campaign trail in 2016. And to the extent he lost to Donald Trump, and Trump was like, I don't care about gay marriage, and so everybody just kind of moved on. So from that point forward, it really did become a test, and it was silent. It was, established, if they thought it was settled. Clarence Thomas's dissent really threw things for a loop because it's now putting them back on the spot. And look, now that they do have the votes for it, for a lot of Republican hopefuls or not, I'm personally of the opinion, I don't think you pay a price either way unless you literally are one of those people like the Mike Pences or the Ted Cruz's of the world who has a hardcore evangelical base.
Yeah.
So at that point, vote your conscience. So we'll find out, where exactly these people stand on this issue.
I mean, on the politics of this, first of all, I didn't do this. I should have looked up when those senators who voted to move this legislation forward, when they're up for re-election. Because obviously with the 6-year terms in the Senate, if you're not up next time around, you feel like you get a little more breathing room. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is, the calculations very different for senators depending on whether they are in a deep red state and more worried about a primary challenger to their right versus in a swing state where if you vote against gay marriage at this point, we're talking about this is a position that 70% plus of the country will disagree with you on. And by the way, a majority of Republicans, which is also what I think is very striking about Ben Shapiro's comments here is obviously he's limiting this in his, verbally to Republican elected office holders. But what are you saying to the majority of Republicans at this point who are like, you know what, we're good with it and we've moved on to other fights? I think it's not just the Clarence Thomas, affirming dissent or however they word that, where he put back on the table explicitly Obergefell. I think it's also because a lot of conservatives like Ben Shapiro and others feel like they have gotten some traction with their attacks on trans rights. And so that has also opened the door to how far can we push this, the stuff about drag shows, all of that stuff, I think has also sort of emboldened them to go back to some of these arguments that they have been quiet on for quite some years.
Well, yeah, that's why I think it's weird. I think it's a wrong move. I've actually openly said that. I'm like, look, you want to fight about gender ideology and whether you plug little kids full of hormones. Yeah, I think that's actually a winning fight and one that should be fought. But if you want to take it back to gay marriage, I'm like, listen, a lot of people who have concerns about plugging little kids full of hormones do not think that consenting adults shouldn't be able to get married. And so when you put it on religious and Christian grounds, then you're actually putting yourself in a losing position. I've openly said this before to a lot of them, and I do think that it's part of the problem is that, look, a lot of these people, they are deeply religious. They have felt aggrieved on this front and have basically tried to fight in a more secular realm of politics now for quite some time. Under Trump, they felt like they had won. Abortion, though, was the greatest victory for a lot of their lives, and it has now put them in a position where they feel like they're winning. And all I will say is good luck. After tried to tell you here about abortion and about how people feel about that, even in deep red states, and they didn't listen. And look, I actually will say this, if you care about the kids issue and gender ideology and all that stuff, making it explicitly religious is probably the single worst thing that you could do whenever you're having that fight.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you saw Rogan and Matt Walsh had a big debate about gay marriage.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which was also very, I mean, it was interesting. It was worth watching. I thought Joe did a good job pushing back on him because ultimately, it came down, he didn't want to use the language of religion because I think he knows, like you said, if you're trying to sell this to everyone, just grounding it in your particular interpretation of your faith is not going to be a view that's held by, a large majority. But it was clear the only way you could really defend this position is coming back to this is a tenet of my religion.
Which is fine. You believe what you want, right?
I mean, to a point, but I mean, not to the point that your beliefs are infringing on other people's rights.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Which
again,
if
you don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married. That's fine for you in your life. I mean, I have to say on the kids piece, obviously we disagree on that whole debate. But the other piece with that is if you push a Matt Walsh or you push a Ben Shapiro they want to keep it politically on the topic of kids because they have the most political traction there. But if you ask them if grown adults living their lives should be able to transition, no, they don't think so.
I agree. I think that's a big problem.
And that's wildly unpopular. So anyway, this whole vote with gay marriage, I do think it's a problem for Republicans politically because a good chunk of their base and many of these senators are really on the wrong side of the issue. It is a little bit like abortion where you have a majority that are good with gay marriage, but the people who are opposed are more vocal and more influential in terms of Republican primaries. So it's a tricky situation. And again, we just saw with abortion how potent it can be when people feel like rights they have gained and taken for granted are now being potentially rolled back.
Yeah, it's gonna be, on the kids front, I think it's worth, I don't know if you saw this, the New York Times actually did a decent write-up about puberty blockers and about the cost.
I did see that.
Let me
also,
I think that's important.
Well, I do think that's important too, but let me say that puberty blockers have been used among girls who have early onset puberty for a lot of years. So, the sudden obsessive concern over it just seems more ideological than it is based in concern over kids. Now, I think there should be more research. I mean, part of the problem is there's not sufficient research to know if this has long-term impacts. But the whole idea of puberty blockers is just to buy some time so that, you can wait a few years before you do undertake some of the things like the hormone therapy. That's the part where things start to be more irreversible. Puberty blockers, you just stop taking them and then you go through puberty.
Yeah,
so it's
there
not
is a cost, as we learned from this, right? And that's why I think
it's still being researched. But there is also a cost to gender dysphoria and to the fact that you have, increased rates of suicide and increased rates of depression and anxiety. So it's not like that is without a cost as well. So I am totally open, and I think we should be able to have a good faith debate about what the care protocol should look like for children who are trans and, for their parents trying to figure all of this out. There's a lot of debate within the community about how long is the consultation period? When do you start puberty blockers? How long does that go on? What about hormone therapy? All of that is totally up for debate, but again, to go back to people like Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro, ultimately, they don't think you should be able to do this at any age, at any point, period.
Yeah, look, this is why I'm not welcome with a lot of these people, because I'm like, listen, I just think we should talk about kids. I was like, if you're an adult, you're 18 years old. I mean, listen, I think there's a lot to be said about irreversibly changing your body, but you could do what you want. If you get a tattoo, you could go do this to yourself if you want to. So that's kind of one of those places where they have libertarianism to an extent, on some things.
On economics,
well, not even necessarily on economics, on other social, I believe
Guns.
Walsh is actually pro-weed. I need to go back and check to see if he is or not, but I'm pretty sure that he is. But then on this, it's like, well, we should ban it. And in general, Americans do not like to ban things, specifically for adults.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, that's not what they're for. That's why, as you said, I think that, everybody converges on the kids. And again, I think it's a very important fight. That being said, the divergence and the real political ground is it can't be a religious discussion. And it also can't be one that impedes on the ability for adults to basically do, within reason, whatever you want to do.
Right.
And I think that is where,
it's not hurting
it's
other
just
people.
it really is one of those where if you don't give that up, you're going to lose the whole fight on all of this.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.